Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for spending some time with us today. Last week, we made a decision that garnered quite a bit of headlines, and we want to spend some time with you unpacking that and addressing what it actually means. And I can appreciate the cynics who want to brush off our position simply because we're a large brokerage. But let's be honest, if we were acting purely as capitalists, we'd be on the other side of this argument. Given our size and scale, we benefit most from closed networks. I invite you to consider who the message is coming from. I am actually a licensed broker who spent over 15 years of my life at kitchen tables, counseling homeowners, driving buyers around in my car, helping them achieve the American dream of homeownership. That dream remains the single greatest driver of net worth in this country. I also served as the president of a national trade organization committed to advancing sustainable homeownership through advocacy that has had a long, reputable track record for fighting for homeowners' rights. Meanwhile, the loudest voices behind the so-called seller choice movement come from a company born out of greedy venture capital who has purchased all of its growth without a sustainable business model or a clear path to profitability. And now, in a rush to appease Wall Street investors, they're pushing an agenda that runs clearly counter to consumer best interests. So let's kick it off today, Holly.
Thanks, Leo. I think what's so important about understanding where we're at is knowing that the decisions we make today will ultimately impact consumer trust as we go forward. And it's critical that we do this together. But in order to understand where we are, we have to go back to where we were and how we got here. If you look back to the early 2000s and the rise of the internet and brokers really embracing that opportunity to share listings on their own websites, it became so important in local markets to have that virtual reach. But what became anti-competitive out of this was brokers excluding others in the MLS from sharing listings. As a result, the Department of Justice came forward and sued the National Association of Realtors. Ultimately, they came to an agreement in 2008 and allowed for equal access to MLS data for all brokers. Now, going forward, we had a lot of calls from brokers and agents across the country really seeking to have more access. And that provided for the Clear Cooperation policy that was launched in 2020. Now, in the last 12 months, there have been a lot of critics of this policy, particularly, as Leo said, self-serving of their own interests. As a result, the National Association of Realtors created a new status that would allow for delayed marketing in hopes of appeasing these critics. But most recently, we saw Zillow and Redfin come forward and saying access to listings is critical in service. It's service to all, including the consumer. So when we look back to 2008 and that VOW policy, it absolutely paved the way for our innovation, competition, and consumer choice. And let's be real, consumer choice is equal for both sellers and for buyers. eXp wouldn't be who we are without that innovation and collaboration. And it's critical to understand how we go forward. So as professionals, let's talk about what this means to you. 2008, the DOJ said you cannot hide listings from competitors or buyers online, and Zillow, Redfin are saying the same thing in 2025. So Leo, let's talk about what this actually looks like. Seller choice has existed. Office exclusives are absolutely that pathway for sellers who maybe need a bit more privacy. They are in the process of readying their property for market. But what's key about this policy is the listing's not shared outside the brokerage. There's no sign, there's no social media, there's no broker broadcast of what's going on. It is in a held closed network. And that's provided for seller choice.
It's very important to understand that we've been doing this for years. eXp has office exclusive technology in a separate system, but it is not a business model. In my 15 years of selling real estate, I can count on one hand the amount of sellers who required this level of privacy. And sitting as the CEO of this company, I hear it once in a while. A federal judge proceeding over a human trafficking case, a DEA agent on the border of Mexico, in El Paso. These are actual examples agents have called me about, and we've worked through that. But in my 15 years of doing it, never did we suggest it as a business model. The second you are advertising it outside publicly via a sign, by putting a sign in the ground that says only on our website, you're actually purely doing that to generate leads and double in both sides. The countless amount of agents who've called me and said, I prepared for a listing appointment. I showed up to the appointment. I have all my cops. And literally the house across the street has a sign in the ground that says only on our website. The seller and I have no idea, is it for sale? Is it under contract? Has it closed? Where is that comp?
It's so challenging when we look at this transparency in the marketplace. Consumers have demanded it for years, and that's what we see as one of the biggest benefits about the internet. The clear cooperation policy provides for that. When a seller lists their property and is ready to advertise, they can do so in coming soon. They can do so in putting the sign in the ground in advance, but maybe delayed showings. All of those are available tools at the ready disposal, depending on what the seller wants. Now, what's great as part of the current clear cooperation policy is MLSs locally have been able to make those choices of what serves their community. MLSs across the company have varying degrees of what a coming soon is, what it looks like, how you can advertise, does it go to Zillow or Realtor.com? Everyone is doing it just slightly differently, and that's a good thing. But when we look at the new delayed marketing status and this new opportunity that NAR has given in March, MLS requirement entry is apparent. But delayed public portal, that's a problem because it delays anything from being seen beyond the MLS. Listing disclosure, yeah, that'll have to be in writing to the seller so they understand what they're being limited by. But Leo, this is where you and I both agree it becomes so challenging for the consumer.
Listen, I would not want to be in charge of NAR. Holly and I found ourselves in a similar position last summer where when the ruling came out and the settlement was shared, we interpreted that information as confusing. And Holly and I, over a weekend, made a decision for our company that got a lot of attention and a lot of critics. We made a unilateral decision as a company. We would no longer do broker to broker to remove confusion to the consumers. We're finding ourselves in the same situation with delayed marketing. We are not going to do it. We truly believe if a seller requires privacy, which we strongly believe in seller choice, coupled with seller truth and education. If a seller really needs that, we're absolutely going to support that. But once that property is inputted into the listing service to be shared with other brokers, our position as a company is we're going to share it with everyone. And it is very important that we all choose to make decisions for our own businesses based on all the information available. This is purely my opinion. But many years from now, or a couple of years from now, when there is class action litigation against our industry, it'll be because of a flow chart that shows that you had to be a member of an association or an MLS to get access to the data that was not made publicly available, and we're just not going to participate in that mess.
It's so important when we look across the board, and these are monthly unique visitors to the largest real estate websites across North America: Zillow, Realtor.com, Redfin, Trulia, and Homes.com. By educating our sellers as to what their access looks like in promoting their listing, they do get a choice. It's really important that we are not building market tactics that steer a seller in a certain direction because it benefits us personally. We want to make sure they have all the education and information up front to best determine what's best for their family.
Last week, you saw us make a commitment to share our data with Zillow, and we stand by that. Today, we'll have a press release making sure that everybody understands that is not exclusive. We want to share our data with Realtor.com and Redfin and Homes.com and any other more major portal who wants to stand for transparency.
As we go forward, thinking of our sellers, thinking of our buyers, it's really about seller choice and seller timing. Bright MLS just did a recent survey, and what was so powerful out of it, the median time on market when you look across the North Atlantic region was about 20 days on market. But what was interesting, those homes that started maybe as an office exclusive, 9 out of 10 of them actually went to the MLS. But the game changer here was days on market increased. Sellers should be aware that if they don't have that power of the punch right out of the gate at first time of listing when the sign goes in the ground, they may be sitting longer. And what Bright MLS found is it was up to 37 days. So as a result, when you and I are having conversations with sellers at their dining room table, the education of the choices they make and how it impacts their family is critical. We want to empower sellers and not restrict buyers, because the other piece of this comes down to fair housing. 91% of buyers want access to all the listings. Anytime we limit access, it limits opportunities. As we work with communities across the country, it becomes more and more important that we have advocacy. See, buyers should have a choice in the agent they choose to work with. And by having information out on the public portals, they're able to do that. They're able to choose the agent who is best for them, that they negotiate a fee with, and they can go and work with in buying that property. We're not able to see that, unfortunately, in countries not like the US. And this is where it's so important, Leo, our breadth of understanding of what it looks like internationally, you have the best handle on.
Our position is slightly different than our competitors because we operate in 23 countries outside of the US and Canadian system. I personally just sold my parents' house in Belize last year in order to relocate them to be closer to their grandkids. It took us 4 years and 5 different brokerages before we will execute a purchase agreement. We had to rely on the buyer to type in the perfect word combination into a Google search bar so the individual listing agent's WordPress website would come up. And then the buyer had to call my listing agent and show him the property because there's no buyer agency. Furthermore, after a very painful process, because it takes forever to get a new bank loan since comps aren't readily available, I was charged a 10% commission. Complexity and lack of information makes things worse. We operate in all over continental Europe. We're the second or third largest brokerage in the UK, depending on the month, depending on transaction count. Let me paint you a picture. It is not cheaper to sell homes over there because there is a cost for eyeballs gatekeeped by multi-billion-dollar companies. The single largest portal in the UK is called Rightmove, and they bill us £50 per month per listing that's active on their portal. Last quarter, in September of 2024, Rightmove rejected a $6.2 billion cash offer from Australia's #1 portal called the REA Group. For context, the UK roughly had 1.1 million transactions, a fraction of the amount of transactions that took place in the United States. I spent time in Europe last year with our European operations, and the sales rep for Rightmove looked me dead in the eye in London and said they were going to raise my rates 10% year over year forever because they can. There is no form of competition over there. And that's the world we're looking at if we do not cooperate in this country. Let me paint you a picture of what this could look like. According to the 2025 T360 Real Estate Almanac, we don't quite appreciate the size of some of these organizations. Anywhere has 7 brands representing roughly 180,000 agents. Keller Williams has 145,000 agents in the United States. We sit number 3 at 65,000 agents in the United States. Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, between its affiliate franchises and company-owned stores, has 64,000 agents in the United States. RE/MAX comes in 5th with 51,000 agents in the United States. Let those numbers sink in. These 5 entities represent 37% of all the listing inventory in the United States, and 33% of the agents belong to them. If we go down a little bit further, Let's look at the top 10 companies. Just the top 10 brands/companies represent 45% of all the listing inventory and 37% of all the licensed agents. Let's paint a picture where we all go to walled gardens at private exclusives with some nonsense marketing strategies. We can no longer go on the market because we've all chosen to go off the market. This is a fair housing disaster that hasn't been seen since the 60s when the 1968 federal housing law was passed. The repercussions are uncalculable. Imagine a world where you can't pull comps to refinance your house and have access to your equity. In South America, where I grew up, your down payment is 50% because the banks can't reliably understand the value and the liquidity of that market. And if we want to talk about antitrust, if one company controls 30–40% of the market in your town, forget negotiating a fair rate because there is no compensation. If a company is hoarding inventory in any market, all the transparency goes away.
It's so critical when we start to look at how we put the sellers first. So I wanted to share with you our policy. It's important you hear from us and not others that they think they know. Our goal is full access with seller control. Always. That's who we are. We are at the forefront of taking care of our clients. So all of our listing agents, we're going to follow seller instruction. We educate consumers on their choices because, again, we are not building market tactics to steer. We are focused on the choices they have and what it means to their family. Office exclusives, absolutely. As Leo said, we do have them. We've had them for several years. And honestly, it came out of because we saw several MLSs go down. We wanted the ability to send our listings directly to Zillow and Realtor.com in the event that there were more MLSs that went down, and we wanted to make sure our sellers could still do what they needed to do and move on with their lives. Also, that buyers had a fair shot to understand what was going on. See, at eXp, we're going to give that choice. It's the sellers, and we will guide them on what that looks like. But also, if they choose to go on the MLS, we recognize that it is critical to do full syndication immediately. And so as a result, we will not be doing withheld listings from going to syndication. As a result of NAR's updated policies, in March, they came forward and created this new status. But as part of the new status, if there were any kind of limits to what a seller could have access to as far as full exposure, we had to put in writing what it looks like. So we have drafted a form to fully disclose this. Now, we recognize that the rule went into effect in March, and many have until September 30th to actually, as far as the MLSs, choose how long that delayed status for IDX feeds should be. We're not waiting. We recognize that sellers need to make decisions today, and we're here to guide them. So this form, we've created a seller advisory, risks of limited market exposure. It's designed for a conversation. It's designed to educate a seller and walk them through what to expect. And more importantly, we also believe in sharing. We believe that it's really critical that as these things come forward, we share with the marketplace. So we are going to empower sellers and empower all of the agents out there, whether you're with eXp or another company, a small company, a franchise, you'll have access to this form.
This is exactly what we did last summer. We understand that these are big requirements on us. And we also understand that 900,000 of the agents that belong to this industry are a small independent boutique that may not have our resources. So once again, we've made the decision to open source this for everybody because we want consumers to have as much information as possible. And we've kept hearing about seller choice a lot lately. But what about buyer choice? If one company dominates a market and hoards inventory, the buyer will not have the choice of what agent they get to work with.
Becomes so critical as we look to the future. As a company, we believe in competition. We believe in choice. We believe in explaining and educating to consumers what it looks like as the market continues to evolve and shift. What we did yesterday may not work tomorrow, and we want to walk consumers through that. but also we're going to share that because at EXP, we do believe in open sourcing. So we've created these industry resources, exptoolkit.com/seller. You have access to all EXP forms, all of our different toolkits. We have a buyer toolkit, also access to EXP trainings, including this video. As we go forward, we do believe that consumers have choice and that education that we follow up makes all the difference.
So we'd like to close with sharing our belief system. We believe in consumers having the most transparency. We believe in a collaborative marketplace. We believe in having to compete on value and service to consumers instead of inventory and market manipulation. We believe that small disruptive startups should have an ability to compete and keep everyone fighting for what's best as a consumer experience. And that's why we will continue to open source our forms, our best practices to defend and protect the American